All right, here we go. All right, so the first thing that we need to do here is to define our parameters. So the resolution says that not everyone should be allowed to debate. By definition, that means that if there is even a single possible instance, even hypothetically, that would cause even a single person to be prevented from debating, the resolution is demonstrated to be true. So imagine if, right now, the start of this debate, instead of having an opening statement, I just took off all my clothes and started sexually harassing my opponent. I don't think it's controversial to say, first of all, that'd be nasty, but second of all, that call-out would be completely justified in ending the debate immediately, declaring my opponent the victor by forfeit, and removing me permanently from the website. So there's 3 points here that I want to walk through. First off, CallOut's currently established written policy clearly allows for participants to be banned from the platform for certain defined behaviors. Number two, this existing policy is both justified and beneficial for the platform. And three, there's not an adequate reason to justify overhauling CallOut's existing policy. So CallOut's existing policy is defined by the terms of service, and I'll go through those point by point a little bit later on. And there's also plenty of quotes directly from the admins of the site and a helpful graphic they put in the Facebook group a few months ago that also illustrates where they believe that line is drawn as to what constitutes banning. But the policy is justified because it's good business practice and it's good basic common sense. I'm sure there'll be objections and we'll address those as they come. But that's kind of where we're starting off on. And that's how I'm going to leave the framing for the debate.
Okay. I have no objection to the framework. It all makes sense to me. I am interested in hearing more of your argument. So if you could go ahead and jump into your case, I'd like to begin by responding to it.
All right. So first off, CallOut is under no obligation to allow everyone to debate. Section 5 of the Terms of Service says that nothing on the website constitutes a binding agreement to offer services or products, or to make such services or products available in your area. In Section 6, 6.6, CallOut establishes that it has the right to remove any content that it wishes from the site, including users. In Section 6.6, I can read the exact text for that, but that's basically what it says. And then in Section 6.7, which is really the meat of it, it has, quote, a partial list of the kind of content that is illegal or strictly prohibited on the website. And this is important. CallOut reserves the right to investigate and take appropriate legal action at its sole discretion against anyone who violates this provision, including, without limitation, removing the offending post's information and/or communication from the websites and terminating the registration of such violators. And then it runs through a list of things that are prohibited content, including harassment, spam, promoting illegal or obscene activities, any sort of sexually explicit content. And then they also say that they reserve the ability to edit that content later based on its own interpretation of those rules. And then finally, I guess kind of wrapping that part of it up, the site admins have said, and I can go into the bigger quotes if you want more detail, there are certain things that they definitely talk about. And what they classify on this graphic, which I can put in the comments later if you'd like, talks about what is never acceptable. It says, quote, "You'll be kicked out permanently. You'll be reported. Your videos will remain up forever, and you will burn in the digital effigy until the end of time." That's what they say. And those include inciting violence, death or terrorist threats, nudity, stalking, harassment, or anything that is considered a crime in the USA. And they also say that in some cases, racial slurs would also qualify for that. There's plenty of others that are said that in certain contexts they could lead to being banned. But the overwhelming weight of evidence is that CallOut's current policy says that they have every right to ban users and that there are certain circumstances which they have specifically said that they will do that.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the introduction. I have no objection to your framework or the way that you laid out your case. So what I'm going to do is just begin by addressing simple justification. I believe that CallOut has the right to do what you're talking about doing. But I'm going to provide 5 responses for why the system of debate that we have set up on CallOut will actually solve for everything that you mentioned. And then we're going to provide an alternative and argue for, in essence, why CallOut doesn't need to have the kind of restrictions you're talking about. So with the policy you mentioned, I've read the terms and conditions. I've read the various behaviors that they do not allow on the site. And theoretically, to private restrictions to place on their site they want to. However, as an online bastion of free speech, I believe that CallOut has a system set up that can solve for all the problems you just mentioned without actually having to do anything. So we're going to examine that. The examples you provide in your case basically break down to one of two scenarios. Either the debater is doing something extreme, say taking all your clothes off. I'm very glad you elected to not do that. Or saying extreme things, right? Racial slurs, whatever you want to throw in there. I've got 5 responses to how QallOut's current system solves for all these issues. The first response is that the debaters can run a critique. This is a special argument spelled KRITIK, and there are 3 types of critiques: rhetorical, epistemological, and behavioral. These are special kinds of arguments to say that irrespective of the analysis and evidence introduced in the round, the opponent deserves to lose because of the thing that they've done. So, if you open the debate round by taking all your clothes off, as a smart debater, I run a behavioral critique and say that taking your clothes off in a civil discussion is unacceptable, and the judges should vote you down because of that. So, we have an argument in debate that solves for that. The second response is that competition solves. I think, generally speaking, people don't like losing debate rounds, and any judge of reasonable intelligence would see someone taking their clothes off in a debate round and automatically vote them down for behaving like an animal instead of a civilized human being. And these people are not going to come back over and over and over again and just lose debate rounds. They'd have to be really dedicated to their cause to do that. So competition will solve for it. The third response is that they can't spread a message. The maximum amount of debate rounds these kinds of people would be able to be involved in would be 1 debate round a month at the beginning of each monthly tournament, which they would obviously lose because of the community vote and the fact that I think QallOut employs intelligent judges. So they don't even have a platform where they can really spread their message. The fourth response is that it hasn't actually happened yet. We have 0 examples of this happening in the status quo on QallOut, which leads me to indicate that we don't have a real problem to solve for. We don't need these kinds of rules because it simply actually have 10 months of successful non-racist, non-naked tournaments here on QallOut, so I don't see a justification for the rules. The fifth response is the marketplace of ideas solves for this kind of problem. These types of behaviors are best defeated when they're brought into the light. And so instead of shielding ourselves from these types of people, we should bring them into the public and eviscerate them through debate and prove just how absurd what they're doing is. This forces us to come up with better arguments against bad things like what you're talking about, and it shames people who engage in those kinds of behavior and actually improves society in the long term. So I oppose the resolution.
All right. So I'll try and address those one at a time. So first off, you talked about freedom of speech. Right, that it's fun. We shouldn't be censoring viewpoints or anything like that. So first off, no one here is arguing or advocating that QallOut should remove anybody from the website simply for holding a controversial opinion or even a repugnant one. Doing so would go, as you said, directly against QallOut's stated goal of demolishing echo chambers. However, viewpoint discrimination is not remotely the same as removing someone for violating the terms of service. The resolution doesn't say that every viewpoint should be heard or that any opinion deserves to be debated. I agree with either of those, incidentally. The resolution says that not every individual should be allowed to debate. Like I said, so as a free speech argument, right, you agree with me. Legally, it's a non-issue, right? Free speech law of the First Amendment applies to the federal government, and the versus New York in 1925 expanded that to the states as well. Private organizations are under no obligation to provide freedom of speech, and in fact, the Freedom of Association Clause is more relevant because private citizens and businesses have to freely associate or choose not to associate for any reason that's not explicitly banned by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I believe I saw on Facebook that you run a YAL chapter, right? I helped out YAL extensively both during and after college. I'm good friends with Cliff Maloney and most of the other national staff, and I definitely understand how important free speech is. I fought for that at the federal level as well. But on the issue of prudence, QallOut on their About page says that QallOut was created to demolish echo chambers. We encourage people to be truth seekers, engage with naysayers and dissidents, challenge yourself to truly understand the arguments surrounding the topics that you feel passionately about. Removing members from the site for violating the terms of service is not only not mutually exclusive at that goal, it actually serves to further accomplish that goal by ensuring that thoughtful debate takes place and it maintains the integrity of the medium. And again, we don't have to say that here's a specific person that was removed. All we have to say is that even hypothetically, there is some behavior that could, even hypothetically, result in one person being prevented from debating.
Okay, so let's begin by talking about this concept of freedom of speech. You're correct. I do run a YAL chapter, not particularly well, I feel like, but I am a huge fan of freedom of speech. So I just want to make a legal clarity here. I never made a legal argument that said that QallOut has an obligation, a constitutional or legal obligation to promote freedom of speech. I understand the difference between private and public goods. So I'm not making a legal argument here. I'm making a principled argument here and saying that QallOut as an organization which is dedicated to abolishing echo chambers and providing sort of this bastion of open and honest online discussion, which is something I wholeheartedly support, that they have a principled obligation to support freedom of speech. And so I believe that implies a certain set of ideals, which I'll get into in a minute. Now, I just also want to be clear that I'm also in sync with the terms of the resolution here. My argument is that everyone Doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what you do in the debate round, harassment, nudity, swearing, whatever, you should be allowed here. Because my case is that freedom of speech is actually going to solve for these types of instances. So let's return to a hypothetical example, right? If you open the debate round by taking off all your clothing, as a smart debater, I immediately respond by running a 5-point critique, a behavioral critique, which says that your behavior is so animalistic and so barbaric, you deserve to lose the debate round. I drop all my other arguments, run the critique, and leave the debate round. Any judge who watches that debate round is going to say, okay, this opponent was clearly so incensed by what his opponent was doing. He ran an argument that says that he deserves to lose. Obviously, any judge with half a brain would vote against someone who took off all their clothes in the middle of the debate round because that's absurd and anti-intellectual, right? No reasonable judge would vote for that kind of person. Additionally, we have the community vote, right? That counts for 1 out of 3 votes in every call-out round. So your community is going to come together and vote that person down as well because, again, I don't think the majority of people on call-out are mentally insane and would vote for someone who does something as disgraceful and anti-intellectual as that. So just to be clear, my case here says that freedom of speech and competition solves for all these problems. We don't need terms of service. We don't need to prevent certain people from being on this platform because we'll demolish them in public and no one will come back and back and back again just to get beaten when they do something absurd, and the smart debaters that we are respond to them and beat them with intelligent arguments. My argument is that by putting these people in public and eviscerating them, we solve the problem without the need for rules.
All right, so just to make sure that we're on the same page here, you're saying that there is no reason, even hypothetically, that at any point could result in anybody being banned from the site. Like no terms of service, no point. Yes? Okay. So the idea there then is, okay, there's other ways to address this bad behavior, right? And we have to say at a certain point, there just aren't other ways to do it. At a certain point, there is simply no way to prevent consistent violation of the terms of service other than removal of the offending individual. There's no half measure that'll do the trick. And the half measure here of, oh, well, people will lose debates. Okay, this isn't an instant of, again, the resolution doesn't say call-out shouldn't allow everyone to win. The debate says call-out should not allow everyone to debate. And at a certain point, particularly if you want to get into the issue of nudity, of harassment, of illegal or explicit material, I don't think that call-out or the members thereof have any reason to be subjected to it. Like say I get a reputation, right, as the person who does that at the beginning of all my debates, right, that just like starts stripping down, right? Do you think that anyone would want to come and watch my debates at all? Do you think that I should be forced to subject my opponent and all of the voters and all of the judges to that on a regular basis? Or at a certain point, isn't it fair for call-out to say, okay, enough is enough. You're not contributing to the discourse. You're harming the integrity of the medium. And as such, we are going to exercise our authority as a private organization to remove you from the site.
Sure. Okay, so your argument is fundamentally pragmatic, and that is that we, and remove these people, right? Because you don't want to subject judges and viewers to this kind of behavior over and over and over again. So I want to examine 2 responses to this. So the first response is that it hasn't happened yet, and we have no reason to assume that it will happen. We have 10 months of successful call-out tournaments with hundreds, not thousands of participants that, to my knowledge, so far have remained free of debates in the nude and other unsavory behaviors, right? So we have a system that so far has not received this onslaught of trolls and despicable people that you seem to be implying that it might. I'd also like to point out that just because the terms and conditions exist does not mean that they're going to prevent people from doing this kind of thing, right? If I wanted to go into an online forum and take off my clothes in a debate round, I doubt I'm going to peruse the terms and conditions with a legal analytical mindset before I go and do that. Why? Because I'm crazy. I'm doing something crazy. So the point is that for some reason people aren't coming to college, this kind of stuff, and we don't have any reason to assume that they're going to do it. Now, the second argument, or the second response I want to make, is it was a response of principle versus pragmatism. Your approach is very pragmatic. If we want to protect discussion, all this kind of stuff, at some point you have to remove disgusting and despicable people. My response is no, is because you're compromising on your principle. I think that free speech should be unlimited. And so if you want to come on this platform and take your clothes off and harass someone and say foul stuff, whatever you want to do, then I think that we should actually accept that and allow those people to come on here, because the system will respond to them in a way that will de-incentivize them from engaging in that behavior. Remember that I gave you 5 different ways that we can actually solve for that just in the way that debate works, right? We have specialized arguments to deal with that kind of stuff. They're going to consistently lose debate rounds. They're not going to even get that much screen time, right? Because no one's going to accept their head-to-head challenges. They can only debate once every tournament because every judge and every community voter is going to vote them down. We also have no empirical evidence of it ever happening. And additionally, this actually allows us to shame these people in public and demonstrate that what they're doing is ludicrous and anti-intellectual. So these are ways that the marketplace of ideas, as John Stuart Mill described it, actually solves for these kinds of issues, right? On your side, you're going to say, okay, we're going to compromise our principles to solve for this problem. Oh, by the way, the problem doesn't exist in the status quo, but we're going to go ahead and compromise our principles anyway to solve for it. My argument is that it hasn't happened. We have no indication to believe that it will happen, and we should side on the side of principle rather than compromising those for a problem that doesn't even exist.
So saying that, oh, it hasn't happened yet, therefore it won't happen, especially given that QallOut is currently fairly small and it wants to grow, right? Again, think of the example, right, that I opened up with, right? I think QallOut would be insane to allow me to come on, say I was voyeuristic, right? And they would let me come on, what, once or twice a month for each tournament to, expose myself. No, that's simply not good business by any stretch. There has to be some point at which any reasonable person says that a particular member is doing nothing to promote QallOut's mission and is in fact harming both the discourse and the website itself. That's not a violation of principles, that's a defense. Furthermore, there is not a single reputable website of any type that doesn't have a terms of service policy that restricts access with some sort of rules. And there's a reason for that. It's no way to run a business. Even 4chan bans users who violate their rules, right? There's terms of service say that 4chan is a privilege, not a right, and the moderation team reserves the right to revoke access for any reason without notice. But again, on the business side of things, QallOut wants to grow. They're currently not a profitable website, but they want to be, right? They don't charge to participate. They're going to have to do ad revenue. And QallOut leadership has expressed an interest fairly frequently in attracting advertisers to the platform. I can't imagine that any of those advertisers would be especially keen on advertising on a video of me harassing you. And there are certainly behaviors that have no place in any civilized debate. Threats, doxing, explicit content, harassment, they do far more damage to the medium and they shouldn't be tolerated under any circumstances. Again, that's not a compromise of principle, that is a defense of that very principle.
Okay, so let's respond to the three arguments. The first is that you claim that by making this pragmatic decision that we're actually defending free speech, we're not compromising on our principles. I'd just like to point out that this is a contradiction in terms. A compromise means that you limit something, right? In legislative terms, we describe it as wheeling and dealing, right? We're going to make a compromise. We're not going to go for the whole extent of what we want. We're going to cut back a little bit. So your defense is that we want to cut back on free speech. We want to say that there's some people that we want to kick off the website because of things that they say or the things that they do because they're unacceptable. I would agree with you that the things that we're discussing are unacceptable, right? It is unacceptable to take your clothes off in a civilized debate. It's unacceptable to use racial slurs or harassive language, so on and so forth. My point is that we don't have to compromise our principled grasp of freedom of speech by making rules that limit freedom of speech. Instead, what we do is we rely on a community of intelligent and intellectual debaters to use the framework of debate to remove these people from the community de facto, right? So we don't create a de jure standard which limits freedom of speech. Instead, we rely on the system, the marketplace of ideas, to de facto remove these people and demonstrate that in a community that radically accepts and approves of free speech, we will still eliminate people who are unacceptable. So you have a contradiction of terms there. Now, your second argument is that every business has terms and conditions, and you're correct, every business does. My argument that in this unique case, they aren't needed because QallOut is a very unique company. They're the only online professional debate platform that I know of. And one of the concepts of debate is that debate is the last gentleman's sport because debate has no rules. And so my argument is that we should allow debate to function the way that it is intended to function, to allow unique argumentation and the structural facilities of debate to remove these kinds of people without actually creating rules that limit freedom of speech. So in this unique case, my argument is that the terms and conditions are not necessary. I'd also like to point out, you haven't argued that any of my methods don't work. I like the judges take note of this as well. I remember because I provided 5 different ways that we can actually, in essence, get these people out of QallOut without creating rules saying that they can't be here. My opponent hasn't said that none of my methods work. My opponent has just claimed that we should create laws instead, right? Now, his third argument was that QallOut wants to grow and that allowing these people on the website would be, problematic because it would seem extreme. Well, my response is that QallOut now has a unique advertising point because QallOut is now the most radical bastion of free speech on the internet, right? We could claim to have a better grasp of free speech than 4chan and Reddit. That's a pretty impressive that's a pretty impressive marketing point. And I think that's because that would be something that could actually be very useful for CallOut, because we could claim to be the only website on the internet that really grasps and accepts free speech, and we can rely on the mechanisms of the marketplace of ideas to remove these people. Because keep in mind, judges, we have 5 different ways: critiques, competition, messaging, the reality, the status quo, and the marketplace of ideas that are going to solve these problems that my opponent wants to compromise to solve for.
All right, the quick point that I would bring up here is that you're saying that, oh, I'm not doing nothing to address the efficacy. It's in this debate right now, I'm the one that is defending the status quo, and you're the one that is advocating changing it by removing the existing terms of service and the existing call-out policy. And I would challenge you to say, if this works, even in principle, you should be able to point to at least one website that exists somewhere on the internet that has no regulation, no moderation, and no ability to remove abusive users, and an example in which that website is successful. And I don't think that there is one.
Yeah, so my argument is that CallOut has a unique opportunity to be the first website to actually try this, to actually embrace a radical acceptance and understanding of free speech, because that hasn't been tried before. I think because people are more willing to sacrifice safe security for dangerous freedom. But as Thomas Jefferson says, I would prefer dangerous freedom to peaceful slavery any day of the week.
So to be clear, you think that the issue with places like 4chan is that they censor free speech, and that if only someplace like 4chan or an open internet was completely open to free speech, that would be more effective. They'd be more effective as a website if they were to do that, and instead of doing it the way that they're doing it currently.
I think it would be better. I think it would be better to say that we're going to allow the marketplace of ideas to eliminate these people and to eviscerate them in public and show that their ideas are unacceptable, rather than to create laws that compromise on the idea of free speech. I think it would be better to embrace the whole principle, to just take the whole thing and to principally hold to it, than make pragmatic compromises. Because I have market mechanisms that do the same thing as your pragmatic compromises. The difference is that mine still hold that principle of freedom of speech.
But it doesn't. Again, refusing to remove people from the website despite repeated, persistent behavior. Most people, the ones that aren't insane, right, might leave after a certain amount of time, right? What if someone's mentally ill and comes onto the website and starts harassing female debaters, right? And those female debaters leave as a result. We don't want that, right? That is bad for the medium. No one's going to invest in it. No one's going to advertise on it. And reasonable debaters are, after a while, going to get tired of having to put up with that type of stuff. I know I wouldn't want to have to review something where some guy's naked the whole time, right? And even CallOut's About page disagrees with you here. They don't say that their goal is to promote freedom of speech for its own sake. In fact, they say they say we don't host debates for debate's sake. We do it to encourage a society of accountability. Again, accountability to what? Two principles. Some of those principles being don't do illegal things, right? CallOut was created, is again, according to them, to demolish echo chambers, right? And that is completely consistent with removing those that have no interest in demolishing echo chambers, seeking truth, or engaging with naysayers and dissidents. Again, that's all stuff directly from their website. So no, that's not an accurate way to frame the argument, as in principles versus pragmatism. CallOut's principle is not that literally any behavior should be allowed for any reason, and we should have this almost ANCAP approach to the internet. Maybe there should be a website that's like that, but it's not CallOut. CallOut's goal is to encourage debate, to encourage thoughtful debate, to demolish echo chambers, and not to just host debates for debate's sake. And I think that what you're arguing is that we should change the purpose of CallOut into something fundamentally different than what it currently is.
Okay, so I like that you described as an almost ANCAP site, as an anarcho-capitalist. That is absolutely what I believe in, and I would like to see CallOut become more like that. So let's respond to your two arguments here. So your first was this example. What if someone who is mentally ill or whatever comes on the website and harasses female debaters? Well, let me tell you what I would do. If someone comes to CallOut and harasses female debaters, I'm going to find every single one of their debate rounds, and I'm going to vote them down. I'm going to post video comments talking about how unacceptable it is that they're harassing females until they stop doing that and issue a public apology on it. because I think that harassing females is wrong. And I would do the exact same thing if a female debater came on this website and started harassing males, because I think that harassment in open discourse is unacceptable and unethical. So what that creates is it's a system where I actually have the ability to use freedom of speech to defeat abusive and disgusting people. Now, your second argument was that if you look at QallOut's About page, right, they want to create the society of accountability. Just to be clear, that's exactly what I want to do as well. I want to create a society where debaters are accountable to the community that supports the debate website that they use. So in the same instance, I guarantee you that the QallOut community would come together and reject and vote down and call out, pun intended, people who do stuff like harass females on this website. That's the way the marketplace of ideas works. What I'm advocating for is a John Stuart Mill-based approach to freedom of speech, and that is you allow the marketplace of ideas to work, and through this radical acceptance of freedom of speech, you defeat people who engage in acceptable and unethical behaviors, because there are mechanisms within the theoretical concept of what debate is that allows for that kind of thing to happen. We have the ability to call these people out and defeat them in public. We don't have to rely on rules or terms and conditions to do that. We can do it ourselves.
If I was somebody who's seriously perverted, mentally ill, or otherwise deranged, having my opportunity once a month to engage in even illegal behavior, and my only punishment is that I had to wait another month before I could do it all over again and force at least 2 people to watch that, right? That is not an acceptable state of affairs. I think that social punishment can only go so far. At a certain point, the only thing that will stop somebody from routinely engaging in illegal, explicit, or any other type of inappropriate behavior, not just bad, but inappropriate or illegal, the only way to stop that is to not give them the avenue to do that.
Okay, so with the remaining minute that I've got left, I want to kind of crystallize the round into 2 voting issues for the judges. I think that there are 2 reasons why you should vote con in this debate round. We're going to talk about the real world, and we're going to talk about the concept of principle. So dealing with the real world, I want to point out that my opponent has literally not a shred of empirical evidence that says that we need rules to prevent this kind of behavior. Why? Because this kind of behavior doesn't occur on QallOut. And since it hasn't occurred in 10 months of successful operation, I would encourage the judges to consider that rules are not necessary, as this hasn't happened so far. The second response, or the second argument under this first one, is that of real mechanics. If you remember my first speech, I gave you 5 real ways that debaters can use radical free speech in the marketplace of ideas to defeat people who engage in unethical, vulgar, or unacceptable behavior on this website. We don't need to hide behind a screen of rules or terms and conditions to limit and ultimately destroy this kind of behavior. We can do it ourselves as free-thinking individuals. The second voting issue I'd like the judges to vote on is this concept of principle, is that in matters of things that are objectively good, like freedom of speech, it is always better to prefer a principle above pragmatic compromises or pragmatic measures. And I think it would be better for the judges to vote con and accept radical free speech than it would be to vote pro and accept pragmatic compromises that will not work at the end of the day.
Again, just to reiterate, free speech is not in any way incompatible with removing abusive users. This isn't a hate speech, free speech thing, because I think we're on the same side of that. But first of all, to address the point that you've brought up a couple of times that no one has been banned from the site, according to the user at BenMouth, who's one of the resident debaters, he said that people have been banned from the site. So that's, I'm just going to sort of leave that there. But again, it's not an issue here. QallOut's established policy that they have right now allows for participants to be banned for certain behaviors. And again, according to one of the RDs, that has happened. Second of all, this existing policy is justified and it's beneficial. It maintains the integrity of the medium in what QallOut currently says its goal is to accomplish, right? Harassment, fighting words, incitements, things like that. You can't do that. You can ban individuals and still support free speech, right? Again, this isn't an issue on that particular dichotomy. I think it's a false dichotomy you're presenting here. Again, if there is even a single instance, even hypothetically, that would cause even a single person to be prevented from debating, the resolution is demonstrated to be true. Violating the terms of service, participating in illegal behavior, or any number of other behaviors are so bad that permanent, not temporary, removal is the only option. Reasonable people can disagree on where exactly that line should be drawn, and I'm sure we do. And I definitely encourage more discussion on this subject. However, a prerequisite for any discussion about just where that line is, prerequisite is the fact that there is a line somewhere. And the very existence of that line is why QallOut shouldn't allow everyone to debate on its platform. Again, if left unchecked, right? What happens when 4chan realizes they can raid this once a month and no one's going to punish them for it? right? Callout's going to become another type of echo chamber, an echo chamber of perversions, immaturity, and possibly even illegal behavior. Every other opinion and reasonable user, investor, advertiser will be driven out because it's not a platform that anybody will want to engage in anymore. So again, we can debate about exactly where that line is, what determines when someone should be kicked out, right? At what point behavior is so inappropriate. But I think that there shouldn't be any debate about the fact that there is a line somewhere, right? Doing drugs on camera, porn on camera, whatever. And the very existence of that line, like I said, is why CallOut should not allow anybody to debate on their platform, regardless of any of the. It's a false dichotomy that my opponent presents. This isn't a free speech issue. It is about the integrity of the site